Daniel and Leela Harris seemed like nothing more than a quiet couple raising their sweet, bike-riding son, Tommy, on Maple Drive. But behind their warm smiles and tidy blue house, they were hiding a nightmare that would haunt their neighbors forever. The Harris family moved into the small blue house on Maple Drive one crisp autumn morning, blending into the neighborhood as easily as leaves falling onto sidewalks. Daniel Harris waved at neighbors as he unloaded boxes from their rusted pickup, while Leela arranged potted plants on the porch, smiling warmly at those who passed by. Their 7-year-old son, Tommy, held a small stuffed fox close to his chest as he peeked from behind his mother's legs, eyes wide as he watched new faces with a shy curiosity. From that day, the Harris family became part of the rhythm of the street, their presence comforting in its simplicity. Neighbors often saw Daniel leaving for work in the early morning, his lunchbox in hand, nodding politely before driving off to his job at the local hardware store. Leela, meanwhile, stayed at home, teaching piano to a few children in the neighborhood, her music drifting softly from the windows during late afternoons. When Tommy wasn't at school, he was seen riding a red bicycle up and down the driveway, waving excitedly at other kids as he sped past, the tassels on his handlebars fluttering in the breeze. To those around them, the Harris family represented the image of quiet, small-town life. They decorated their home with lights during the holidays, mowed their lawn regularly, and offered warm smiles to those they met on their evening walks. Yet for all their friendliness, the family maintained a clear boundary when it came to their home. Leela always met piano students at the door, guiding them to the front room without allowing them to wander further. Delivery drivers were told to leave packages on the porch, and any neighbors who attempted to drop by without notice were met with polite but firm reminders that the family valued their privacy. When invited to block parties, they would attend briefly before excusing themselves, claiming they had early mornings or that Tommy needed to rest. People accepted it, telling themselves that some families simply preferred to keep to themselves. And the Harris family never gave anyone a reason to think otherwise. Tommy's presence was what kept the Harris family's image so normal. Neighbors often heard his laughter as he played in the front yard, saw him drawing chalk pictures on the sidewalk, or carrying books from the library under his small arm. Occasionally, he would stop in front of another child's house, staring through the fence with a longing to play, but he would always be called back by his mother's gentle voice from the porch. Whenever Tommy tried to invite a friend over, the invitation would be quietly declined by Leela with a sweet smile, explaining that Tommy needed quiet afternoons for his studies or that the house wasn't tidy enough for visitors. People admired how dedicated she was to Tommy's well-being, never suspecting that her careful control was hiding something else entirely. Behind the curtains of the blue house, the Harris family lived under a strict routine. Tommy's bedtime was always at exactly 8 o'clock, and the lights in the house would dim shortly after, making the house look peaceful from the outside. But inside, once Tommy was asleep, the energy in the home shifted. Shadows moved behind drawn curtains, and faint sounds of dragging and muffled noises could sometimes be heard late at night by those who happened to be walking their dogs nearby. No one wanted to believe these sounds were anything more than the creaks of an old house settling or the rustling of raccoons near the garbage cans. It was easier to keep believing in the image of the Harris family as a quiet, harmless family, with nothing to hide, just another ordinary couple with a child on a quiet street. But the truth was that the Harris family's carefully maintained normal life was nothing but a painted mask, hiding secrets waiting for the moment they would finally spill into the daylight. It was a warm spring evening on Maple Drive when the power went out without warning. The street, usually alive with porch lights and the flicker of televisions through living room windows, sank into darkness all at once. Families stepped outside, some holding flashlights, others simply standing under the glow of the moon, talking in small groups while children chased each other with glow sticks. The neighborhood had grown used to minor outages during storms, but that evening, the sky was clear, the air heavy with the scent of newly bloomed flowers, and the sudden darkness felt strange. Neighbors gathered at the corners of their lawns, sharing nervous laughter, asking if anyone knew when the power might return. While most families came out to check on each other, the Harris house remained quiet. The blue house at the end of the street was dark, with not even a flashlight flickering behind the curtains. The family, so often seen waving during their evening walks, did not step outside, did not call out, did not check with neighbors. Their porch, usually tidy, sat in shadow, the wind causing the porch swing to creak softly, an eerie sound that made some glance over with curiosity. Across the street, a neighbor named Mrs. Caldwell noticed that the back gate of the Harris home was swaying back and forth in the breeze, slamming softly against the fence post, a sound sharp in the otherwise quiet night. She found it odd, as she had never seen the Harris family leave their gate open. The power returned a few hours later, and lights blinked on along the street. Windows glowed once again, televisions resumed their chatter, and children were called inside to wash up for bed. The Harris house lights turned on too, but no one saw Daniel or Leela come outside that night, and Tommy was not seen peeking out from the curtains as he sometimes did. The next morning, Daniel left for work as usual, his expression calm, waving briefly at Mr. Jensen across the street before driving away. Leela was seen watering her flowers on the porch, her movements slow, eyes hidden under the brim of her hat. Tommy did not ride his bike that afternoon. Instead, he sat on the top step of the porch, his small hands gripping the handlebars of his bike, eyes fixed on the road, staring without blinking, as if waiting for something only he could see. Over the next few days, a smell began to drift across the fence between the Harris house and the neighboring yards. At first, it was faint, something unpleasant but hard to place, like rotting leaves or damp earth. People dismissed it, telling themselves it was probably a dead animal under a porch or garbage that had been left out too long in the warmth of spring. But the smell grew stronger, sharper, until it clung to the air even when the breeze blew. The neighbors began to talk in hushed voices, glancing toward the blue house when they passed by. Some considered asking Daniel about it, but the quiet politeness of the family made them hesitate, not wanting to seem rude or intrusive. It was Mrs. Caldwell who finally called the non-emergency police line, her voice shaking as she explained the smell and the swinging gate, her fear mixed with guilt for interfering in someone else's business. When officers arrived, Daniel opened the door with a forced smile, explaining that it was probably a raccoon that had crawled under the house and died, and that he would take care of it soon. But as he spoke, the officers noticed Leela standing in the hallway behind him, her eyes fixed on the floor, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron. They noticed Tommy sitting on the stairs, clutching his stuffed fox, his face pale, eyes wide, staring at the officers without blinking, as if silently begging them to come inside. The smell was undeniable, thick and heavy, curling around the officers like a warning, making them realize that something was terribly wrong inside the house that everyone thought was just another ordinary home on Maple Drive. When the officers stepped inside the Harris home, The first thing they noticed was the overwhelming smell that grew stronger the deeper they moved into the hallway. It was no longer something they could pretend was from a dead animal outside. It clung to the air, coating the back of their throats, making one of them cough as he glanced around the living room. The room was clean, almost unnaturally so, with floral curtains framing the window and small family photos neatly arranged on a shelf. The carpet was freshly vacuumed, leaving crisp lines across the floor, and a vase of wilting flowers sat on a polished table. Everything was in place, as if prepared for visitors, but the air felt heavy, pressing down with the weight of something unseen. Daniel stood with his arms crossed, shifting on his feet, insisting again that it was probably just a dead raccoon that had crawled under the porch. Leela lingered in the kitchen doorway, her hands still gripping her apron, her eyes avoiding everyone, flicking toward the basement door before quickly looking away. The officers asked to check the basement, explaining it was standard procedure, and Daniel hesitated for just a second too long before forcing a smile and agreeing. He moved to the basement door, pulling a key from his pocket, and locking it with a click that seemed to echo through the silent house. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into darkness. A single bulb hung from the ceiling. At the bottom, its light barely reaching the first few steps. The officers descended carefully, each step creaking under their weight, the smell growing thicker with every breath. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement appeared cluttered with old furniture, boxes stacked in corners, and a washer and dryer humming softly. But it was the far wall that caught their attention, where a large wooden shelf was pressed awkwardly against the concrete. One of the officers moved closer, noticing scratch marks along the floor, as if the shelf had been dragged back and forth repeatedly. They asked Daniel to move the shelf, and for a moment, he froze, his shoulders tightening, his jaw clenching before. He nodded and stepped forward. Together, they pushed the heavy shelf aside, revealing a hidden door, smaller than a normal entryway, secured with two heavy padlocks. The smell was unbearable now, leaking from the edges of the door like a warning of what was hidden inside. When the locks were opened, the door creaked outward, and a wave of thick, rotting air swept over them, forcing one officer to step back and cover his mouth. Inside was a hidden room, small and cramped, with concrete walls and a single bare bulb dangling from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across the space. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of various sizes, their contents murky and unrecognizable at first glance. The room was cold, the hum of several freezers vibrating softly. In the silence, each one sealed shut with duct tape and chains. An officer moved toward the nearest freezer, pulling at the tape, the sound tearing through the room, sharp and violent. When the lid was finally lifted, what they saw inside made the room spin. Carefully wrapped packages, labeled with dates and symbols, were stacked neatly inside, the contents looking like raw meat, but with shapes that were too human to be mistaken for anything else. Fingers, an arm, a piece of a torso, all packed as if they were cuts from a butcher's shop, frozen and hidden in the dark. One officer stumbled back, pressing a hand to the wall to steady himself, while the other called for backup, his voice tight, unable to hide the horror. The basement that had been hidden behind the carefully arranged home above was a graveyard, a silent witness to something monstrous that had lived alongside Maple Drive for far too long. The Harris family's secret was no longer hidden. The carefully constructed life upstairs shattered in the dim, humming cold of that hidden room, where the true story of Daniel and Leela Harris was waiting to be discovered. News of the discovery in the Harris basement spread quickly, crawling through the town like a cold wind, leaving whispers and fear in its wake. Police cars lined Maple Drive, their lights flashing against the tidy houses that now felt too close to something dark. Reporters arrived, standing across the street with cameras, speaking in hushed, urgent tones as neighbors gathered in small groups, arms folded, eyes darting toward the blue house at the end of the street. Some neighbors cried, unable to understand how the family they had trusted, the family whose child had played with theirs, could hide something so horrifying in the place where they all felt safe. Inside the house, officers and crime scene teams worked carefully, pulling out evidence piece by piece from the hidden room below. Each jar on the shelves was tagged and photographed, its contents examined under harsh lights, revealing fragments of human remains preserved in cloudy liquids. The freezers were emptied, the packages unwrapped, each one exposing another piece of a life that had ended in that cold basement. The names of the missing slowly began to match with the remains, and the town learned that the Harris family had not simply been living quietly, but had been hunting and hiding for years. As the investigation deepened, a pattern began to emerge. Daniel and Leila Harris had chosen their victims carefully. They targeted those who moved through the town without family or friends, the drifters who stayed for a night or two, the lonely who no one would look for when they disappeared. Daniel would find them at the hardware store or near the gas station, offering them a meal or a warm place to sleep for the night. Leila would prepare a room in the basement, acting with kindness, smiling as she handed them a blanket, her face calm as she led them down the stairs, where the lock would click softly behind them. There were notebooks found in a locked cabinet in the basement, filled with dates and coded notes, each line marking another victim. The codes were simple but chilling, a system the couple had developed to track their victims, recording when they arrived and when they were gone, what was taken and what was stored. It became clear that Leila had been the one to handle the remains, learning how to preserve and store them without suspicion. She had kept everything organized, making sure the house remained clean, ensuring no noise escaped to the neighbors who live only feet away. Daniel had found a way to profit from the horrors they created, selling parts under the cover of wild game meat to buyers who never asked too many questions. The couple used the money to maintain their quiet life, paying bills and buying gifts for Tommy, who was kept away from the basement, told that the noises were nothing but old pipes or raccoons. The boy lived surrounded by the smell he did not understand, in a house where the floors above held laughter and soft music, while the darkness below hid the truth of who his parents really were. Neighbors struggled to accept the truth, remembering the friendly waves, the small talks about weather, the polite smiles at the mailbox. Some refused to believe it, convinced there must have been a mistake, unable to connect the image of Leila watering her flowers or Daniel fixing a neighbor's fence with the horror now tied forever to the blue house on Maple Drive. But the evidence was clear, and the Harris family's perfect image shattered, revealing the rot beneath the surface. The family that seemed so ordinary had been living a nightmare of their own making, a nightmare that the town would never be able to forget, no matter how much they wished to erase the memory of what was found in that hidden basement. The blue house on Maple Drive stood empty, its windows dark and the porch abandoned, police tape fluttering in the warm breeze as curious onlookers slowed their cars to stare. It had become the center of nightmares for the quiet town, a symbol of how evil could hide behind trimmed hedges and polite smiles. The swing on the porch still moved gently in the wind, creaking softly, a sound that once felt comforting, but now only reminded neighbors of the horror that had lived inside those walls. The flowers Leela had tended were wilting in their pots, their bright colors fading under the sun, untouched and forgotten as the house waited for its next fate. Tommy had been taken by social services the day his parents were arrested, led down the front steps clutching his stuffed fox, his small face pale, eyes wide, as he was placed into the back of a car. He did not cry, only turned to look at the house one last time, as if trying to understand why he would not be allowed to return. The neighbors who watched could not erase the image of that quiet child leaving the home, the last piece of the family's false normalcy vanishing down the street. Some prayed for him, others wondered what he had seen, and if he would ever be able to forget the shadows that had lived beneath his home. Inside the house, investigators continued to search, finding small details that painted the true picture of the Harris family. Receipts hidden in drawers for cleaning chemicals, detailed lists of supplies carefully planned, even a hidden safe containing cash from the illegal sales Daniel had made. Under the cover of selling game meat, in Leela's closet, they found journals filled with neat handwriting, daily logs of chores, piano lessons, grocery lists, and hidden between them, short notes about when a victim had arrived and when they were gone. The handwriting was precise, the notes clinical, as if she were documenting nothing more than the weather. The trial became the focus of the entire town, reporters flooding the courthouse, sketch artists capturing the image of Daniel and Leela as they sat side by side, their hands cuffed, their eyes avoiding the cameras. The details of the victims were read aloud, the remains identified through painstaking work, each name echoing through the courtroom, each one a reminder of the lives stolen and the families left with questions that would never fully be answered. Daniel sat mostly silent, eyes on the floor, while Leela sometimes looked toward the doors, her expression unreadable, as if she was somewhere else entirely, disconnected from the world she had helped destroy. Neighbors struggled to move on, avoiding walking near the house, crossing the street with lowered eyes, refusing to look at the porch where Leela once sat with her tea. Parents held their children closer, locking their doors more carefully at night, glancing out of their windows when a car they did not recognize slowed down the street. The idea that the Harris family, the ordinary couple with a quiet child, could be monsters, living unnoticed for years changed something in Maple Drive forever. Eventually, the blue house was boarded up, the windows covered, the doors locked, and a sign was placed outside, warning trespassers to stay away. But people still came, driving slowly, taking photos, pointing toward the porch where Tommy once played, speaking in hushed voices about what had been discovered below. The Harris family became a story parents told to teenagers who stayed out too late, a reminder that darkness could hide behind any door, even one that looked perfectly ordinary. The truth of the Harris family could never be washed away, the memory of what they hid in their basement forever tied to the quiet street, reminding everyone that evil could live in the most ordinary places, waiting behind smiles and locked doors, unnoticed, until it was far too late to stop it.